Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Brent Colescott, the Senior Level Global Learning Architect and Strategist at SumTotal Systems. A former practitioner of 20 years and now an analyst and strategist, Brent is a recognized innovator and leader. He regularly attends and speaks at HR technology events worldwide. Presenting Brent Colescott, who will be speaking on the topic, the new collar workforce, skills versus degrees.
It is a pleasure to be with you today. I'm excited about the opportunity to speak with everyone and share with you some information in terms of the new collar workforce, skill versus degrees. So let's just jump into it. I'm bringing this to you live from my home office here in Houston, Texas. So hopefully wherever you are around the world, you're having as beautiful a day outside as I am. So let's just get in. So yes, I am a senior level global learning architect and strategist and practitioner previously, which means I kind of have that insight of both sides of the table and where I see things happening. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about is really the culmination of conversations and research that I've done over the last 18 months globally, speaking with executives, HR executives, CLOs, as well as attending conferences and finding out information. So curated it all down and actually had some breaking news this morning that really shows the relevance of what we'll be talking about. So let's first get into where we've seen the changing of norms in 2020. I mean, this year, who could ever predicted it? We've seen lots of things happen in terms of the pre-COVID, post-COVID. I want to run through some ideas that I've seen and to kind of give it away. I actually created this chart here in March of this year. So a little bit of a precursor. I'm actually fairly on target with a lot of what I saw in terms of previously thinking about this. So when you look at where we were pre-COVID and post-COVID, some of the major aspects I really thought were important to identify as part of the changes in HR. So when we look at remote work, well, we're all remote right now. Previously, this was a sales-centered kind of approach. Maybe there was a flexible 1 day a week or 2 days a month kind of thing where organizations would allow their employees to work remote from a benefit perspective. What we've seen now is that executives have fully embraced this because they've had to experience it. They've seen the productivity has not suffered. And so now what we're seeing is that remote work is a business continuity strategy for many organizations. Wellness. This was one I keyed in on early, and I still continue to believe that wellness is going to be a major component moving forward due to a lot of the emotional stress that people have had in the quarantines, dealing with the different work situations, work loss, the different pandemic reactions. But when we see wellness pre-COVID, it was more of a cost-saving benefit to the organization. How many steps could we get pedometers out for, help reduce the claims costs of the insurance programs? But now we're going to see that wellness is going to be an essential business function in organizations. ILT, this is one that we all know has changed very differently, just like we're not together today. But ILT was really around because it was easy to do. It allowed people to move around, bring them together. Presenters for ILT had very low overhead in terms of what it took to run the sessions. And it was engaging. But what we're seeing is now the VILT, Virtual Instructor-Led Training. It's been around for 20 years, but it's actually now really taken hold. And we see lots of transitions towards virtual instructor-led training, whether it's just even elementary, middle, and high schools for many of the students, colleges even. But we're seeing lots of transitions to that. And those that really were ahead of the curve in adopting those methodologies are seeing the benefits of that now. HR, and by the way, I want to thank Neeyamo and Rise Above. This has been an amazing conference, and from HR perspective, this really speaks to this line item that I put in here, that HR has always been kind of an adjacent strategic partner to the business, but really what has happened in this time period over the last 6 to 9 months is that we've seen HR really move to the center in terms of their strategic importance to the organization, whether it was determining what groups needed to be in the workplace, moving people home, the furloughs, the skills needed to adjust to the different product lines and changes in service. We're seeing that HR has now become a very critical partner to the business continuity of an organization. Now we're going to go into a couple of areas here in the beginning when we talk about pipelines, talent pipelines, but I think it's most important, the college situation. And really this morning before the session, and keep in mind I wrote most of the session a month or two ago, there was an article that came out of the Wall Street Journal this morning. Actually, it was yesterday, but it was breaking news on LinkedIn this morning. And the article is titled, "Is This the End of College as We Know It?" And I want you to keep that in mind, that this is something that is being debated as far as an impact on the COVID process, the pandemic, to this organization, and where it lies in terms of our talent and our organizations as we have that talent in place. So when you look at college, it was 4-year college degrees for the most part, where we see that pipeline of talent coming in degrees. But now what we're looking at, and particularly with colleges, they're changing their models. They're trying to adapt very quickly, much like all of us. But now we're seeing that online training, the idea of virtual lectures, the ILTs we've mentioned, skills, those are changing now in terms of how this model is going to work. And we'll go into this in a minute. But then the last piece, and I think this is really interesting, is time. I think we've all seen the compression of time over the last few months. It used to be we had this luxury. That's where a lot of those ideas of transformation plans and programs could be out there. We'll get to it. But the idea now is time is essential. We're hearing about roadmaps and plans that were 2 years to be put together or executed are now happening in weeks and months. We're seeing projections of things that were going to happen in 2023 from activity levels to 2025 even are now happening now, today. Whether it's retail or any of the other aspects of time has sped up a lot of the production of what's going on. So that's kind of our pre and post impact on some of the norms, as I mentioned. I put this list together in March and feel that it's been pretty resilient throughout. But let's talk about talent. Let's talk about where we're at with terms of the skills and degrees and the pipelines of talent we have. Now, as I mentioned, college is changing, and we're seeing the standard path or pipeline that most organizations had was you had the college system that would then create professionals that would then feed into the professional organization. We were standard graduates. They would come equipped with certain skills. The business would leverage them and move them up beyond that. Professional development was always a big thing in organizations. But what I've found in the conversations I've had globally with senior level HR executives is that the graduates that have been coming out the last few years have not been fully equipped. They've not been fully equipped in the fundamental aspects of what employers like and what they need to have in place. Things like conflict management, managing projects, team collaboration. Lots of those skills that they would assume had come with those graduates are just not there. And so there's a whole shift in how the businesses are having to reorientate their development programs. And so when we look at higher education, and again, keep in mind that this Wall Street Journal article just came out this morning. This is something I've been looking into for a while. As I did some research, one of the things that I found was last year there was some insight from Dr. Richard Vedder. And I thought this was probably the most telling of what I've seen and what I'm hearing from executives, which is, so the kids are not learning as much, they're paying more to learn less, so they're getting less for more. For all the money going into educating them, there's not much of a vocational result. That's the key, not much of a vocational result. And that's impacting the businesses. That's why we had skill shortages, the challenges of having that pipeline of employees coming in that are ready to go and hit the ground running. And when we look at the impact of the pandemic even, now what we're seeing is the idea that second-tier universities, 4-year school, brick and mortar, are to education what department stores are to retail. They're about to begin a death march. And again, this was from Scott Galloway at New York University Stern School of Business. And this was actually just a few months ago. So when we keep that in mind and see the progression, we're looking at what the fall semester has looked like. We're looking at what the spring semester looks like. It's challenging the model that we've seen as far as our talent coming towards us. And then when you look at what's happening just in general, HR departments, the de-emphasization of degrees in terms of the idea that you would go to college, you would get that degree would give you that leg up, that significant step forward. It's not really playing out anymore due to the speed, that time piece. It's a precious commodity now, that it's happening so fast that we've seen organizations prioritizing skills that people have to do things over the fact that they had a broad-based degree. Now, new type new talent pipelines are emerging. And this is where we're seeing the change, very much like we saw, as I mentioned with that article, we're seeing the new pipelines coming forward, meeting that time crunch, that need, that the quickness that we're seeing in terms of what people are wanting, adaptation, the changing landscape of what happens in the day-to-day. So when we look at what businesses and organizations need to do, we found that Josh Bersin, one of the renowned experts globally in terms of HR and HR technology, learning and development, says we have to shift to a world of creating candidates and not attracting candidates. And I think this is the big part about where we see the learning and development functions happening in our organizations. Now, I kind of write on the side for my own blog, and one of the articles I wrote was business always finds a way. And I think that's important because as we look at that existing pipelines that are failing, new pipelines are developing. This is an example of a student, a high school student at a Black & Decker plant, manufacturing plant. And what Black & Decker has done is they've actually created classroom space in their production facility in which they're working with the local high schools to bring students over that have an interest in actually having a career working with them. They're bringing them in, they're having training that they're doing on site, and then for about 2 to 3 hours a day, these students will then work side by side with the people that are on the manufacturing floor. This is just one example where we see businesses are looking at ways that they can start to augment their own needs for their talent, creating their own talent pipelines. So whether it's more development programs internally, more online training programs, more skill sets, or creating programs such as this with high school students coming in, they're creating their own pipelines because they're seeing that the existing pipelines that we've known for decades are not returning them the talent that they really are so desperately need. So when we look at what business is doing, business is changing, and HR cannot support businesses as needed without changing too. And the burden of developing talent is quickly shifting to the employer. And that's because the employer has very specific needs. They know that they can apply those to that talent. The talent will then skill up in a manner that they need to be quickly able to adjust and adapt to the changing business environment that we see. So two terms have really started to permeate now in the HR realm. We're hearing a lot of them happening. The idea of upskilling and reskilling. Now, these two have really become in vogue because of the pandemic. We've seen the change in which organizations have had to shift people to remote status. We're seeing processes that are being impacted. And so when you consider upskilling, upskilling is the addition of new skills to help with your existing job that you have. The idea of maybe a shift to the environment with how you've done something from a process perspective. Maybe it's the digitalization, the automation of a process that you've been part of. Now you're being upskilled to continue to maintain that automation of that process to still achieve the same outcome. Reskilling is when we see organizations no longer needing a certain skill set, wanting to keep the talent, and then providing that talent new skills or reskilling them to be more effective in the organization. Both of these terms are going to be terms that you're going to hear a lot of moving forward probably in the next few months as we continue to work through the changes based on the pandemic. Now, I love this cartoon. I think this probably puts it all in perspective in terms of when I talked about the pre-COVID, the post-COVID, the idea of time and the changes in terms of our talent pipelines. When you think about this, and as was said earlier, I've been a practitioner. I can't tell you how many organizations I've been in the last 7 to 10 years that have talked about their own digital transformation in the workplace. We're going to be digital. We're going to transform. And it's this process that just continues to seem like it goes on forever. I love this, the fact that digital transformation is years away. I don't see our company having to change anytime soon. And then the COVID wrecking ball. This is what has created that time now, that urgency. That's where those roadmaps and those plans that were 12 to 24 months out have been executed and done in 2 months or 2 weeks. This is the challenge that we've seen. And this is changing the very way we do things in our organizations. So I thought from a metaphorical perspective, this is probably the best way to show why we've seen this change, why we're seeing the idea that degrees aren't necessarily keeping up with the time versus the skills that are needed that are out there. So when we look at some of the data in terms of the reskilling and upskilling that's happened, this comes from Deloitte in their 2020 Global Human Capital Trends Survey. They found was that 74% of organizations that they surveyed absolutely know that reskilling and upskilling is important to their ability to survive, to be able to adapt to the changing market conditions. This is something they know they have to do. 74%. That means 26% are actually ready for it. And when we look at how many organizations are actually actively doing this, ready to do this, only 10% of organizations are ready to able to act on reskilling and upskilling initiatives in the organization. So there's still a lot of work to be done. And that's going to happen rapidly, as we know, as we've seen the changes in the pace of things happen. Now, there's a term that I really found interesting when it came to the the reskilling and upskilling perspective, and it's this term, the new-collar worker. The new-collar worker was coined by IBM CEO Ginny Rometty about 4 years ago, so this wasn't even anything pandemic on the horizon. But this idea of the new-collar worker is basically someone who has the blue-collar manual labor role, but has upskilled themselves to be technologically savvy in terms of doing their job. In many instances, we're probably seeing a lot of blue-collar workers in the roles that have changed from what they used to do manually in person to now being done virtually. So again, this idea of reskilling and upskilling, I really love the idea of the new-collar worker because it shows that this progress has happened, that these people have changed very much so due to the pandemic, but have now adapted to a new world environment. And so we see individuals who develop technical and soft skills needed to work in the contemporary tech industry through non-traditional education paths. Again, keep in mind that skills versus degrees, the non-traditional education paths. This is where the businesses are finding their way to get that talent, those skills, and those people that they need. This I just thought was absolutely amazing. So consider the new-collar worker. This is an individual, and this was from China, in which one of their mines areas that they've done, because of COVID, because of safety challenges, what they've done is they've actually taken drivers that would drive this heavy machine equipment, and they're upskilling. They're using 5G to actually have remote areas where they can be in place. So they're actually driving these vehicles, working the mine, so that backhoe, that truck, both are being done remotely. So when you consider that new-collar worker, this is someone who might not necessarily have a technological skill set, but is now sitting in this environment, this computer-based room, using new technology skills to do the job that they're getting done. So a little bit more for a stunning effect, but I thought it was really interesting to see this impact of the new-collar worker. Now we know that really the best way to adapt and to change and respond to the changing marketplace is through education. Education, knowledge. The knowledge attainment gives us that insight, the ability to see around corners, to predict better the future, what's happening. The more knowledge we have, the better off we'll be. And what we're seeing is from in terms of a trend perspective, we look at the overall trend of technology and human adaptability, and we see learning is the accelerator. And we look at the gap that was there, and we know that like in technology, Moore's law, the computing capacity doubles every 2 years. Well, now what we're looking at is how COVID has an impact in terms of our ability to adapt. When you consider all the things that have been done in this last 9 months, the acceleration, that's really where you see this gap closing, and our ability to adapt much quicker has been based on learning. Now, there's some interesting stats in terms of the learning. We saw that in the beginning of the year, now with my organization, Skillsoft SumTotal, we have content that's available for consumption by our customers. And one of the things that we saw at the Skillsoft side of the house was that year over year, in March and April, there was a 351% increase in the consumption of the content on our servers. Our customers that were out there were consuming this content in amounts that we've never seen before. And again, this goes to that adaptability. People were looking to make sure that they had the skills, that they were upskilling themselves to be able to adapt quickly to the changing environments that we saw. So this was huge. This was probably one of the most significant learning events. And I'm not just saying for our organization, but globally, when you look at the consumption of learning content during that time period, I would say it was probably one of the most amazing learning events that we've seen in modern history. Now, when we look at what modern learning is all about, and the idea of these skills that we constantly need to be working on, the new learner is really going to basically start to have a process of learning for the sake of learning, understanding parameters in which they learn within, but it's going to be more of the idea of learn to then unlearn to learn again. So the idea of someone learning something, and you consider the idea of college degree, that you learn something, one thing, and you continue to carry that forward. This is the idea that we learn, we unlearn, and we learn again. So there's a constant turnover of information and knowledge to be continued able to adapt to the changing workplace and the changing environments really around us. So this idea of learn, unlearn, and learn again is probably going to be one of the greatest skills anyone can have moving forward in this current state. Now, when we look at what modern learning is about, and much like that learn, unlearn, and learn again, Gartner actually did a study in the last month or two, which they said 33% of skills workers needed 3 years ago are no longer relevant. So again, the idea of that college degree, the time that it takes to get, versus the idea of skills, and in terms of those skills, how long those skills are even relevant. So again, we want to create more of an ability for people to have a learning environment, a learning process, but the information is going to be constantly being updated and changed throughout the time that they're employed. So whether it's the reskilling, upskilling, this is that process that we see it's going to be constant and constantly changing. Now, there's two ways of going about some of this new world of learning. There's the certificate and then there's the certification. Now, they're not the same. Certificates are basically when we attend sessions, whether it's professional development in an organization, it's a one-time event, you get a nice certificate, you can put it on your wall in your office or your cubicle. Doesn't really come with a lot of depth. Certifications, though, is where I see a lot of these skills and that skill versus degree aspect happening. Certifications are going to be where a lot more of our employees are going to be going towards, not necessarily being graded on what degree they have, but what certifications they have. And this is tied directly to the idea of skills. So when we look at Microsoft and their announcement earlier this year, they basically have said that they want to have a global skills initiative aimed at bringing more digital skills to more than 25 million people. And a lot of that they're actually going to give away for free. This is a huge piece of what they need. They know they have to develop their own pipeline to continue to grow their organization based on the use of their products, including their customer base too. Those customers rely on their products as well. So this is a smart business move by Microsoft. And we see the same thing with Google. Google, again, is looking at continuing to create and evolve their pipeline of talent, as well as the ecosystem that they have that supports their customers and their employees or their customers out there. So by August this year, they said that by the end of next year, they will also aim to provide free digital skills to more than 40,000 firms and businesses. So again, it's a smart business move. The costs are basically none to some people, but these are skills and degrees. And so when you think about the idea of a degree for a four-year institution and the cost around it versus where the skills now are adaptable and are being provided by these providers, this is a very interesting time. And it's no wonder the Wall Street Journal came out with this article today about, is this the end of college as we know it? So this model is in very much a disruptive state. And it's going to be interesting to see where we go in the next few years. Now, just from general projections of spending that we're seeing in terms of development aspects and those skills, this was a survey that was done earlier this summer in terms of where the training and development versus corporate real estate. So we know that the remote workforce and the idea of where people are is probably not going to be the same as it was pre-COVID. So we're seeing corporate real estate is taking a major hit. But the interesting thing is the inverse, is that money that is being saved on corporate real estate is going back into the investment of training and development for individuals. So in general, what I would say, what we are seeing in the market overall is that we're seeing a digital acceleration. Consider that wrecking ball into that office conference room. It's no longer about transformation, but the acceleration of digital alternatives to existing and outdated processes. We're seeing more of a documentation of skill sets. This is where a centralized hub of data in terms of where employees' skills are so that they can be reviewed and they can be assigned to different teams to quickly address changing environments. So we're seeing more, the organizations that have more of an understanding of the skill sets, the adaptability, are more agile to respond to changing business conditions. We see online professional development in demand more so than ever before. This is an area where organizations are fully embracing it. It's not something you do on your own time. It's part of the day. More executives and more importantly, middle management are supporting this. And then we see the talent pipelines will be changing. They will be shifting from, I believe, just like this article, colleges will still exist. I want to make sure I clarify that. They will still exist, but they will be very different in the term of the role that they provide to businesses and organizations as we look at where the skills, the upskilling, and the reskilling happen. So just want to kind of wrap this all up by saying that with SumTotal, SumTotal is the organization I represent. We do have a learning platform, learning and talent platform that covers the entire employee life cycle. This is going to be important for organizations as they move forward in this new agile world that we're looking at with the digital acceleration. The concepts of being able to have the information readily in front of you, have your people remotely access it, but also being able to deploy those people, continue to develop them, upskill, reskill them. This is all going to be central to an organization that has these kind of platforms and are equipped to keep them agile in the workforce. So at this point, I do thank everyone for your time today. I wish you the best for the remainder of 2020 and wish you a very happy 2021 in a much better way than we are today. And hopefully one of these opportunities will allow us to gather together again.